Hello, and welcome to the final part of the final installment, at least for now, of KRAD COVID readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, and for 100 of installments of this now, going back to the spring of 2020, I have been reading my writing to entertain you during these ridiculous times we find ourselves in. I really thought we'd be completely past this pandemic by the October of 2021, and I'm kind of appalled that we're not. So I want to reiterate, please wear your masks. If you haven't been vaccinated, for heaven's sake, get vaccinated already. It's obviously safe, and it's the people who aren't vaccinated who are dying from this now. So please, get the shot in your arm, wear your mask, stay safe, wash your hands, be careful. We can get through this if we just stop being stupid. Anyway, this is the last installment for a while. Once I finish this, I will have run out of works of short fiction to read. But I have a few in process, so I want to take a few months off anyway. Possibly I will start up again in January of 2022. We'll see, or maybe even sooner than that. I don't know. But and I should have a few more works of short fiction to read to you by then. Meanwhile, I want to thank everybody who subscribed to this channel. I want to thank everybody who's watched this channel without subscribing to it. I want to thank all the people who've commented. I want to thank all the people who've liked the videos on Facebook and Twitter and on my blog and elsewhere. And just generally, you guys, the support has been wonderful, and I'm glad people have been enjoying these readings, and I've been able to provide some modicum of entertainment during this absurd time period in our nation's history, in our world's history, really. I want to remind everyone that you can still find me online in all sorts of places. I post regularly on Facebook. If you search the name Keith DeCandido, or rather go to the fan page for Keith R.A. DeCandido, you can follow me there. I'm on Twitter at KRADEC, K-R-A-D-E-C. I'm on Instagram at KRAD418. I'm on Tor.com, regularly writing about Star Trek and pop culture of all sorts. As we record this, I've been finishing off my Star Trek Voyager rewatch, and we'll be starting up a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch. I'm also reviewing each new episode of each of the new Star Treks that come out, whether it's Discovery, Picard, Short Treks, Lower Decks, Prodigy, Strange New Worlds, etc. And I'm writing about other stuff too, including reviving the Great Superhero Movie rewatch every 6 months. And all sorts of places where you can find me online. Plus, of course, my Patreon. Can't forget my Patreon. Patreon.com/KRAD. You can read TV reviews, movie reviews, excerpts of my works in progress, vignettes featuring my original characters, first looks at my first drafts, and best of all, cat pictures. For only $2 a month, you get cat pictures and a monthly movie review. And for more money, you get all that other stuff too. So please check it out. Again, patreon.com/KRAD. Again, thank you guys so much for watching this channel and supporting it over this last 19 months or so. Meanwhile, let me finish this last bit. Many Splendors has been following the Sonya Gomez-Kieran relationship throughout the 2nd through 5th seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation. These last 3 chapters, 2 of the last 3 chapters, will cover the time period around Silicon Avatar and Disaster, with the epilogue jumping forward to shortly before the first S.C.E. story, The Belly of the Beast, which takes place right after the end of the Dominion War, at the end of Deep Space Nine's What You Leave Behind. Without further ado, here is the last bit of KRAD COVID readings for a while, Many Splendors by Keith R.A. DeCandido. Chapter 9. Captain's Log, Stardate 45130.1. We have turned Dr. Kyla Marr over to the authorities on Starbase 413, following her unauthorized destruction of the crystalline entity. We are now proceeding to Mudor 5. Sonya, good. I need you to... Before Geordi, who had just arrived from the bridge, could finish his sentence, Sonya said, I've realigned the warp coils and run a level 2 on the deuterium injectors. They look a little spotty. Geordi stopped in his tracks and shook his head. I was just going to mention the warp coils. What was wrong with the injectors? Sonya shrugged. Nothing major, just a 0.1 reduction in the flow. I figured it was best to check. The diagnostic will be finished in half an hour. Great. Geordi grinned. You're going to work me out of a job, Lieutenant. Again, she shrugged. Just doing my job, Commander. Not that it's much of a challenge. She wasn't so impolitic as to say that out loud, of course. Of course, right. 2.5 years ago, I would have blurted that out along with 15 other stupid things. But that was when she had reported on board. She had slowed down, and she'd learned not to babble, or at least, not so much. More to the point, though, she had learned the Enterprise, inside and out. She knew every trick of the warp drive. She knew every plasma conduit, every injector, every ODN conduit, every isolinear chip in the engine room, if not the entire vessel. There's nothing left to learn. That wasn't entirely fair. The ship had its share of surprises, from the faulty replacement piece from McKinley that caused a warp core breach, and, indirectly, a witch hunt on the Enterprise before Picard put a stop to it, to Wesley's experiment that trapped his mother in a warp bubble. Wesley was gone now, having finally enrolled in the Academy, which had disappointed Sonya but had thrilled Tess Allenby, who had taken over at Khan on Alpha Shift, only to transfer to the Lexington shortly thereafter, along with Gar Costa. The corner office had been reduced to herself, Kieran, and Helga, and had left the latter feeling like a third wheel. And then Helga had died rather brutally during the Enterprise's encounter with some odd dark matter that had been phasing parts of the ship out of existence for brief seconds. The floor under Helga Van Meter had done that, and rematerialized while she was in the middle of falling through it. It was one of the most grisly deaths Sonya had ever encountered, and it still gave her nightmares, which usually ended with her screaming and Kieran comforting her. With Tess, Leon, Wesley, and Gar gone, and Helga, Bernie, and Denny dead, Sonya found that she didn't really have anyone left on board to talk to except for Geordi and Kieran. There were lots of new faces, including Martin Kopf and Robin Leffler, both recent Academy graduates who were thrilled to be assigned to the flagship. Sonya recognized their excitement from a distance as she realized with a start that she no longer felt it. Indeed, she found herself avoiding Kopf and Leffler because they reminded her too much of how she used to be. The shift went uneventfully, a welcome respite after the tumult of their disastrous mission to the Melona IV colony and subsequent pursuit of the crystalline entity responsible for that planet's destruction. And Sonya went back to her cabin, asking the computer for messages. She barely registered the usual litany of journals, personal messages from Mommy and Poppy, and various duty-related queries, but was shocked to hear the computer conclude the list with a communique from Captain Schoenhertz of the U.S.S. Oberth. Sonya blinked. I didn't know the captain got the Oberth. Her old professor had always sworn she'd never take starship duty again, and Sonya wondered what had changed her mind. Computer, play comm from Captain Schoenhertz. The round face and thick curly blonde hair of Katrine Schoenhertz appeared on the small comm screen on her desk. Hello, Sonya. I hope this message finds you well. I've been hearing good things about the work you've been doing on Enterprise. You're probably wondering why I'm calling from a ship, since I said I'd never take starship duty again if my life depended on it. Well, my life doesn't depend on it, but I got an offer I really couldn't refuse. It's a one-year project that will be studying some new ways of dealing with antimatter. We've got one slot left on the team, and I brought up your name. I've appended the mission specs to this message. This position is for a full-grade lieutenant who knows her way around an antimatter injector, so you fit the bill nicely. Or rather, you will, shortly. Schoenhertz's eyes suddenly went wide and said, Okay, I wasn't supposed to tell you about your impending promotion, but your CEO will probably be giving you the good news in a day or two. She barely listened to the rest of the message. I'm getting promoted! She was thrilled to see that her hard work had paid off and that she'd be advancing to another position on the Enterprise that wasn't likely to be qualitatively different from the one she had now. Worse, even the vessel's missions had become mundane. No, that's not fair. Nothing that happens on this ship can possibly qualify as mundane, but her complaint to Geordi that she wanted to be there when the Enterprise came across what was out there was now 3 years old. And after 2 Borg attacks, getting involved in a Klingon civil war, playing host to everyone from primitive colonists, to Vulcan diplomats, to transcendent aliens, to Akamarian thugs, to Counselor Troy's insane mother, encounters with Sheliak, Romulans, and Sada terrorists, Gumtu, Talarians, two-dimensional creatures, and more spatial anomalies than she could shake a stick at, not to mention regular visits from Q, Sonya began to grow weary of it. Too many of those missions had body counts attached to them. Besides, she had her career to think of. Where could she go from here? Geordi wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, and that pretty much cut off her only real avenue of advancement. If she was going to be a chief engineer, which was something she truly wanted, it wasn't going to happen here unless something happened to Geordi, and that didn't bear thinking about. And then there's Kieran. With a shock, she realized that she hadn't even thought about him until now, which was horribly unfair, as Kieran had become very important to her. Indeed, he was pretty much the only thing tying her to the Enterprise right now. That's not enough. It was a thought that left her sad, but she had worked too hard to become the best Starfleet officer she could. For 3 years, that meant learning the ropes on the flagship. Now, though, the best thing she could do for her career was move on. Schoenhertz had said that there was only one position, so Kieran couldn't come with her. Besides which, Kieran had already made it clear on numerous occasions that he had very little ambition within Starfleet, which jived with his slow promotion track. He'd be lucky to make lieutenant commander by the time he was 40. And he'd also said numerous times that he had no interest in leaving the Enterprise. Of course, that was before we started dating. Taking the transfer would mean breaking up with Kieran, or at least separating from him. No, breaking up. She could barely keep up with duty in a relationship with somebody she served with. Subspace relationships were never, in Sonya's experience, successful. The only ones she'd seen work were people who were already married or otherwise committed before the separation, and she and Kieran weren't anywhere near that level yet. I have to tell him, she thought, and only then realized that she had already mentally packed her bags for the Oberth. Chapter 10. Captain's Log, Stardate 45156.1. Our mission to Mudor 5 has been completed, and since our next assignment will not begin for several days, we're enjoying a welcome respite from our duties. You've got to tell him. Sonya had been saying this to herself for days, ever since she and Kieran both got their formal promotions to full-grade lieutenant at the beginning of the Mudor 5 mission. They were now holding station for a few days, and Geordi had given both his new full lieutenants a few days off before I drop your new duties on you. At present, they were in civilian clothes, heading for the Arboretum. Keiko was 9 months pregnant with her and Chief O'Brien's child, and several officers had volunteered to do some occasional gardening duty to take the load off the botanist. The vagueness of Geordi's phrasing regarding the new duties had been at Sonya's request. She wanted to be the one to break the news to Kieran that she was transferring to the Oberth. So I'm assuming we're going to have to weed the Famtils again, Kieran said cheerfully. Probably, Sonya muttered. Sonny, is something wrong? Oh, nothing. Kieran stood up straight and said in stentorian tones, The sound you have just heard is a lie. Back to his normal voice. Come on, what's bothering you? Before Sonya could even come up with an evasive answer, all the while admonishing herself for not giving him the straight answer he deserved, the ship started shaking. Lights flickered on and off, and the ship continued to buck and weave. What the hell? Kieran said before he was knocked to the deck. Sonya was gripping the doorframe of one of the labs they were passing en route to the Arboretum. Finally, the shaking stopped, though the red alert siren was still blaring and emergency lights were all that illuminated the corridor. Kieran looked up at Sonya from his prone position on the deck. I ask again, what the hell? Dunno, Sonya said. You must have hit something very hard. She tapped her comm badge. It was the start of beta shift, and Geordi had left a skeleton crew in engineering, with Lieutenant Aleakala in charge of the 5 people on shift. Gomez to engineering. Chowan, what's... I can't talk, Sonya. Come on, everybody get out, now! Behind Chowan, Sonya could hear the 4-note chime that meant a bulkhead was dropping. There must have been a core breach or a hull breach. All decks, brace for impact! That was Lieutenant Monroe, who was in charge of the bridge during this light shift. Kieran had got to his feet. What, another one? The words had barely escaped his mouth when the ship rocked again, sending them both to the deck. Sonya's ears were then assaulted by an explosion as the door to one of the labs down the hall exploded. She recalled that Lieutenant T'Pral was supervising an experiment with chronicling. Several containers of the stuff were in the cargo bay right now, more than they needed for the current allotment of thrusters for T'Pral's project. Sonya had a bad feeling that it was the chronicling that exploded, and the only way for that to happen was if there was lethal radiation levels in the lab, which, thanks to the blown door, would be in the corridor in a minute. As one, Sonya and Kieran moved to drop the emergency bulkhead. Kieran got there a moment sooner and gave her a goofy grin as he pulled the lever down that lowered the duranium door from the ceiling. While Kieran did that, Sonya tapped her comm badge again. Gomez to engineering! Her comm badge gave a low trill indicating that it wasn't functioning. Walking over to the bulkhead, she touched the computer screen, but it didn't respond. Great, comms down and power's down. She looked at Kieran. I don't suppose you're hiding a tricorder in your pants. If I said I was just glad to see you, would you hit me? I'd certainly consider it. Then I guess I'll just say no, I won't. Don't. Sonya glanced down the corridor away from the emergency bulkhead they'd just dropped. Come on, we need to get to engineering, see if Chowan needs help. Kieran nodded and followed her, only to find that another emergency bulkhead had been dropped. Looking up and down the bulkhead, as if it would provide answers, Kieran finally said, You know, I don't think I want to know why this thing was dropped. I just hope it was because of something on this side. I just hope it wasn't because of something on this side of it. Yeah. Sonya looked up. Maybe we can use the crawlways. For what exactly? To get to engineering. Sonny, we don't know how bad the radiation is up there. And we don't know anything. Sonya snapped. And she sighed. Sorry, but we can't just stand here and hope somebody rescues us. The ship is obviously in big trouble, and we have to help. We're closer to engineering than the bridge anyhow, so let's get down there and see if there's anything we can do. After considering the point, Kieran said, Yeah, you're right. I just hate crawling around in there, you know? Sonya couldn't help but smile. Mr. Gravity Boots can't handle confinement? I'm a creature of the air. That's why I like to stay in a nice, big, spacious engine room. Sonya and Kieran crawled for the better part of an hour and only made about 10 meters worth of real progress. They were constantly doubling back, going around, and avoiding various obstacles in their path, most of which were due to yet another catastrophic malfunction. While it was possible for a ship like the Enterprise to have one or two malfunctions like this, it was almost impossible for so many systems to completely fall apart at once. We must have hit a quantum filament, Sonya said when they took a brief rest at one junction, sitting across from each other in what passed for a wide space in the crawlways. That's crazy. The bridge would have seen it coming. Only if they were looking for it, and why would they be? You know how wide those things aren't, she said with a grin. Nah, I'm thinking Romulan attack, or maybe a new Borg weapon. Sonya shook her head. The damage was too catastrophic, too across the board. Weapons fire wouldn't do that. Or if it did, it'd be enough to crack the ship in half, and we'd have felt it if that happened. I don't know, Sonny. Kieran, remember when we first met? Cutting himself off, Kieran blinked. Yeah, but I don't see... You told me that it was a design flaw. I said it was a tribble-com. Who was right? Oh, that first meeting. It was Sonya's turn to blink. What other first meeting was there? Okay, I was thinking of the day you came on board and I passed you and Denny in the corridor on the way to a staff meeting. We didn't really meet, though, Sonya said with a smile. We exchanged words. I said I was running late for a staff meeting. Sonya honestly didn't remember the conversation that clearly. That day was a haze of nervousness and anticipation and her inability to give the speech to Geordi, but decided not to let him know that. He's going to be disappointed enough when I tell him what I have to tell him. Slapping his knees, Kieran made as if to rise. Shall we, Boogie? Kieran, I'm leaving the Enterprise. What? I'm leaving the Enterprise. There's a position on the Oberth open. A 1-year mission dealing with new ways to harness antimatter under Captain Schoenhertz. I'm taking it. Sitting all the way back down, Kieran said, Oh. I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I didn't know how. Did okay just then, he muttered. It's a great opportunity. Yeah, it is, and you'd be stupid not to take it. Her mouth hanging open for a moment, Sonya finally said, Really? Of course. Geez, Sonny, I don't expect you to be a slug like me for the rest of your career. I mean, yeah, you're on the Enterprise now, but you're one of dozens. That's fine if you're me and you don't want to stand out in a crowd, but on the Oberth, you'll be sitting pretty. The bitch will be running the place inside a year. She smiled, relieved more than she could adequately express that Kieran understood. I hope so, since it's only a 1-year project. Kieran laughed. Sonya had never been so glad to hear that wonderful sound as she was now. Come on, he said, getting up for real this time. We've got work to do. They arrived at a crawlway just above engineering on Deck 32, after 3 hours of crawling around, a journey that should have only taken 1 hour at the most. Yes, the Enterprise was large, but they had started out fairly deep in the saucer section. Unfortunately, the damage from what Sonya was morally certain was a quantum filament had been extensive. Many of the crawlways were cut off for one reason or another. Jenry, we've crossed the ice! Kieran said when they arrived over the corridor outside engineering. Sonya looked at him with confusion. Sorry, he said. Old book I read when I was a kid, The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. There's this long journey, and at the end... Before Kieran could finish, he was interrupted by a tapping sound on the floor beneath him. Kieran and Sonya exchanged glances, then shifted so they weren't kneeling on the hatch. Sonya tried to open it and saw that it was jammed. Somebody must be stuck down there. And me without my P-38. It's in the same pants as my tricorder. Figuring she had nothing to lose, Sonya yelled, Is somebody down there? A muffled voice said something, but she couldn't make it out. Lousy duranium, too soundproof, Kieran muttered. Sonya started looking around the crawlway. There's got to be some way to open the hatch. Kieran reached into his pocket. All I got is this weed whacker. Looking at the long cylindrical item that was used to remove weeds at the root without overly disturbing the ground, Sonya started turning over possibilities in her mind. What we need is a sonic enhancer. Frowning, Kieran said, How would that... Then he brightened. Oh, right, perfect. Except we don't have a sonic enhancer. Then he grinned. But we do have the Elix bafflers. They're running along the ceiling there. Glancing up, Sonya grinned. Reaching up, she pried a panel loose, then looked at the components running through it. Now that's ironic. What is? She grinned and looked at Kieran. We need the weed whacker to pry the baffler out before we can modify it so it'll turn the whacker into a P-38. Life's full of little ironies, Kieran said as he handed over the weed whacker. We make a good team. Sonya found she had nothing to say to that. Within 2 minutes, Sonya had gotten one of the bafflers out. 4 minutes after that, they had finished the modifications to the weed whacker. 10 seconds after that, the hatch was open. 6 engineers stared up at Sonya and Kieran. Chowan Aliakala, Robin Leffler, Martin Koff, and the other three who were on duty with him, whose names Sonya was embarrassed to realize she didn't know. It doesn't matter, she thought sadly. I'm leaving. I am so glad to see you two, Chow-An said. We're running out of air down here, and I don't know what's happening in engineering. We heard someone raise the blast door, but we can't get in there, and we couldn't get the damn hatch open. Kieran grinned. Let's see what we can find out up here. Care to join us in Leg Cramp Central? A few hours later, it was over. Riker and Data, or rather, Riker and Data's head, since his body had been electrocuted, got to engineering and raised the blast door. The bridge had dumped power to a monitor down there so they could restore the antimatter containment field. Sonya had been rather nonplussed to see how close they had all come to blowing up, especially since, had Riker and Data not arrived when they did, the field would have collapsed when she and Kieran were still crawling around in the drive section. Everybody had a story to tell of what they were doing when the filament hit. From Troy taking command of the bridge after Monroe's death, to the captain being stuck in a turbolift with 3 children, to Lieutenant Mahoyak riding herd on a group of teenagers who were suddenly trapped in a lightless, sealed-off holodeck. But the story on everyone's lips was the fact that Keiko gave birth to a baby girl, and Worf, of all people, was the midwife. Soon enough, they were en route to Starbase 67. Geordi threw a party in Sonya's honor, at which the only drink available was hot chocolate. Sonya groaned, and so did everyone else, when Captain Picard showed up to wish her well. He even gamely took a sip of the hot chocolate, and left without a drop on his uniform, to Sonya's relief and everyone else's disappointment. Upon arrival at the Starbase, Sonya and Kieran said their goodbyes in his cabin. Kieran had been very supportive until today. His usual flippancy was muted. He kept putting off letting her leave until she had to force herself to return to her quarters so she could clear them out. When she went to the airlock to disembark, her hastily packed duffel bag over her shoulder, he was waiting for her. "This is it, then?" he said. It was the same thing he'd said 6 times in his quarters. "Kieran, please, I need to go. The Oberth is waiting for me." "I know. I didn't mean to hold you up. I just wanted to say goodbye." Kieran was going to say that they'd done that, but one look at his face made her realize how cruel that was. Kieran wasn't very good at saying goodbye. She thought it was in part due to his father dying while he was away at the academy, though she figured that might have just been her own amateur diagnosis. Either way, she couldn't begrudge him getting in one last farewell. And she was going to miss him. Kissing him gently on the cheek, she said in a quiet voice, "Take care of yourself, Kieran." With that, she walked past him and went down the gangway, refusing to let herself turn around one last time. If she did, she wasn't sure she'd be able to resist his wide, pleading brown eyes. Epilogue. Captain's Log, Stardate 53122.9. Our new first officer, and the new head of the Da Vinci's S.C.E. team, Commander Sonya Gomez, is reporting for duty today, and about damn time, too. With the Dominion War over, I'm looking forward to going back to less perilous missions like the one that claimed Commander Salak at Randall 5. From everything I've heard, Salak's replacement should live up to her predecessor's high standards. The ships just keep getting smaller, Sonya couldn't help but think. Of course, when one's career begins on a Galaxy-class vessel, almost everything has come down in terms of size, but each subsequent vessel she'd served on, from the mid-size Oberth to the compact Sentinel, had been smaller than the last, and the Sabre-class Da Vinci was the smallest of all of them. She hadn't any intention of leaving the Sentinel, even with the promotion to commander, but she was also specifically requested by Captain David Gold of the Da Vinci, based on recommendations from Admiral Ross's office that apparently included the kind words of the legendary Montgomery Scott. With that much brass behind it, Sonya could hardly turn the assignment down, especially since it meant supervising not just an engine room, but a mobile Starfleet Corps of Engineers team, that went out solving the galaxy's problems. It was a great opportunity. Gold had no engineering background of which Sonya was aware. However, he'd been in charge of the Da Vinci for several years now, ever since its assignment to the S.C.E., after a well-regarded tour commanding the Progress. Besides, Sonya had spent all of her adult life among engineers, and that led her to the conclusion that the best people to supervise them weren't engineers. The only fly in the ointment was when she looked at the crew roster and saw who her second-in-command would be, which was why she was thinking about the size of the ship and the history of her captain right now, as it was easier than thinking about her second officer. Kieran. When the gangway door at Starbase 96 slid open, there he was, standing in the Da Vinci corridor. She hadn't laid eyes on him in 8 years. He had gained some weight, and while his unkempt brown hair still covered his entire head, it had thinned a bit. His amused brown eyes and easy smile hadn't changed. The latter widened when he saw her. "Sonny!" And without warning, he grabbed her into a massive bear hug. Until this very second, Sonya had no idea how she was going to react to seeing Kieran again. To her relief, it was joy, and she returned the hug with almost as much enthusiasm. That big smile had been missing from her life, and she was so happy to have it back. Kieran, it's so good to see you. Same here, Sonny. Same here. They finally broke the embrace and stared at each other. Sonya found her eyes going to the gold collar under his black and gray uniform jacket. Figures. You've only gone up 1 grade rank. You should have my job. Kieran shuddered. No chance. Don't want it. I prefer to have power without responsibility. Salick was great at that administrative stuff, and so are you. After all, you ran an engine room and did a damn fine job, too. I heard about that trick you pulled with the warp field on the Sentinel. Sonya found herself blushing. Altering the Sentinel's warp field to make it seem like a Cardassian ship while they were stuck behind enemy lines was a trick and a half, especially coming after a prolonged fight with some Jem'Hadar ships, but it got her a commendation. Captain Amalfitano had said it was at the top of her very long list of reasons why she got the promotion to commander. Anyhow, he said as he led her down the corridor toward the turbolift, you're going to love it here. We got a tax systems specialist who served on DS9 with O'Brien, so we can all trade chief stories. Oh, and we have 2 Binar civilians to do the computer work. That surprised Sonya, as she hadn't remembered seeing that on the crew roster. But if they were civilians, they wouldn't necessarily have been on that roster. Kieran continued to babble on the way to the bridge. When the doors parted, Sonya found herself in a space that was smaller than the quarters she and Lian Su shared on the Enterprise 11 years ago. A thin strip of deck ringed the bridge, lined with consoles, with a command well a step down that included Khan, Ops, and the command chair. A white-haired, blue-eyed, pleasant-faced elderly human stepped up from the ladder as Kieran spoke. Captain David Gold, this is your new first officer and the new head of the S.C.E. team, Commander Sonya Gomez. Sonya smiled and said, Permission to come aboard, sir? Granted. Gold returned the smile. Welcome aboard. I understand you and Duffy served together under Jean-Luc Picard on the Enterprise. Yes, sir, Sonya said. Of course he knows. Kieran probably told him. Good! I've known Picard since his academy days, and he doesn't turn out bad officers. It'll be a pleasure to have you 2 working together. I'm sure it will, sir. And Sonya found that she meant it. She wasn't sure where her relationship with Kieran would go from here, or even if it would, given their positions in the ship's hierarchy. Not to mention on a ship this size. The population of the Da Vinci was 4% of that of the Enterprise. That would mean their lives were in a fishbowl. Relationship might not be the best, wisest move. But that was for tomorrow. Today, she was on a new ship, looking forward to a wonderful new assignment. And she already knew that she could count on at least one member of her team. I can't wait to see what happens next. Thus endeth Many Splendors. Obviously, I lifted some dialogue and situations from various episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. But, you know, I do that. There were some flashbacks in Wildfire by David Mack that we saw from Duffy's perspective in that story. I retold a couple of those scenes, including the first date and Sonya leaving for the Oberth. I retold those from Gomez's perspective in that story. So it was a lot of fun doing that little, like I said, an engine room's eye view of Star Trek The Next Generation and tying together all the different engineers we saw. Thank you very much for watching. Again, find me online at DeCandido.net. That links you to all the different places you can find me, including my blog, Tor.com, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. And my Patreon. Please go and support my Patreon. My Patreon is awesome. Please stay safe. Please wear your masks. Please wash your hands. And if you haven't been vaccinated, please get vaccinated. There's really no good reason not to. Unless you have a good medical reason that you were told by your doctor to not get vaccinated, please get vaccinated. You'll live longer. Thank you very much, and we'll be back at some point maybe, or if not, this is the end for now, or forever, or something. I don't know. Anyway, take care, everyone.